Alright guys, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his descendants, to the Prophet's companions and followers, and the men and women that walk in their footsteps, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. Wanted to thank you for joining us tonight, either here in person or on the live broadcast. We're broadcasting on both YouTube and Facebook. So I wanted to say Jazakallah khair. It's just so happened, by the way, that tonight is the 7-year anniversary of the Tafseerah program. This is the longest standing program here at Tarbiyah. I think it's just as old as Salatul Jum'ah. When we started our first Jum'ah, that same evening we had the Tafsir program. So it's been 7 years. And some of you, I looked at the pictures actually from the first night, and some of you are still here. So consider that to be a beautiful thing, alhamdulillah. So we've been in the shade of the Quran now for 7 years, in the shade of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, just, I guess just ordinary people who are trying to understand what is it that the divine expects of them. It's the simplest thing, really. I mean, this is not, an academic pursuit for us. This is about finding answers by which we're able to live our lives, by which we're able to treat each other properly, serve the Creator by serving His people, chart a path for ourselves towards salvation, attaining and achieving what is good in this life and preparing ourselves, inshallah, for what is good in the afterlife. So this has been our pursuit, really, and through so many conversations, hundreds of those conversations that we've had over the years, we are almost nearly at half of the Quran. The Quran was revealed in 2 phases. One phase is in the city of Mecca, while for 13 years the Muslims lived there under tremendous amount of persecution. And then after the migration to the city of Medina, 10 years over there that were marked with relative prosperity. The nature of the Quran changed, its teachings, its directives changed as the migration took place. So we are almost actually at the end of the Meccan period of the Quran. I think we have maybe 4 or 5 verses left. 4 or 5 surahs left before the Meccan Quran is completed. And then inshallah we're going to jump into the Medinan Quran, which basically again marks a completely different type of teachings and instructions and injunctions from the Creator. So tonight is also interesting because we've been on this hiatus, from I think since February, from before I went to Umrah, and then when we returned, after Umrah, it was a couple of weeks before Ramadan, so it did not make sense to restart and then stop again. All of our evenings in Ramadan are obviously occupied with so many things, and so it was not feasible. And then after Ramadan, we're recovering. So it took us a couple weeks, but now alhamdulillah we're back at it, and it's very exciting for me personally. My wife was asking me yesterday about how I felt now that Tafseerah is back on track, and I told her Tafseerah is the one thing that gave my Fridays actual meaning. Everyone prays Jum'ah, but every single Friday for so many years of my life I would spend, about 4 hours after Jum'ah, just going through my notes and putting something together, in order to come and, deliver our tafsirah every night. So it's great to be back, and I'm very thankful that you guys are here. Alhamdulillah, also, most of the kids are off school now, so, it's good to see some young people in the crowd, as well. Very happy, alhamdulillah, to see that. But tonight's surah is very interesting because we're again, for those of you who may have forgotten or maybe attending Tafseerah for the first time, I use the word Tafseerah and not Tafsir. The commentary or the exegesis of the Quran is just tafsir, which is studying the verses and what God is trying to say. Seerah, the word seerah, happens to be the biography, the history, the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we combine the two words, tafsir and seerah, and we made it into tafseerah. And tafseerah is, it's just play on words, really, that's what it is. But the idea is that as we study the Quran, we're also studying seerah. We're also studying the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we are now, I think, are left with about 6 months before Hijrah, before the migration to Medina. And the nature of the surahs that are revealed in this time period, it addresses particular issues, particular challenges, particular circumstances that are happening in Mecca by way of preparing the Muslims for the impending migration. That is the primary objective of the Quran at this point. And as it physically prepares the Muslims of the time to migrate to Medina, it also, in a more indirect, in a more liberal way, it prepares Muslims in general, in any time frame, in any spatial dimension, to prepare themselves to perform that spiritual migration. So, if the Muslims in Mecca needed to physically detach themselves from the vices of Meccan society, from the gambling, from the alcoholism, from the prostitution, from the injustices, from the profanities, in order to go seek a new, good, beautiful, clean, pure, unadulterated, graceful life in Medina, every single Muslim throughout history has to go through this type of immigration, this type of, it's an immigration that doesn't take a physical form, perhaps, perhaps sometimes it does, but most of the time it really takes a spiritual form. This is about someone who is surrounded by a terrible group of friends and realizes over time that these friends have done nothing to me but hold me down, and basically disconnect me from my highest potential. I don't want to be with these people anymore. I need to perform a spiritual, migration of sorts. It applies to someone who's not Muslim, and then that person, decides to come to the deen, come to Islam, and kind of trying to sort out what to do with the old life, right? I mean, we have parents, and we have friends, and we have memories, and we have good things happen. It wasn't all bad, right? So what am I supposed to do with my old life? I want to become Muslim, I still have parents, and I still have things, so what do I keep and what do I not keep, right? That is the essential question that our surah tonight, basically addresses. And so the nature of the surahs that were revealed in the last few months of the Meccan period mostly address the challenges that are happening at that period, and how is it that the believers are supposed to make adjustments so that they go and seek and pursue that new life. And so what are some of those circumstances? So number one, the impending loss of wealth. All these believers are about to leave their, Mecca is not necessarily happy with the spilling over of Islam. Now it's a local problem in Mecca, and Quraysh is trying to take care of that problem on its own. And they are not interested in Islam becoming a problem in all of Arabia. So they're thinking that maybe we can just contain this right here and not allow it to spill over. So the Meccans were not necessarily approving of the migration either. Okay, so the migration had to happen, in a clandestine fashion. It had to happen, under wraps. It had to happen secretly. And in order for this massive operation to be pulled off, you can't say anything like, you're not going to go to your neighbor and try to sell your house, and here's the deed, where are you going? Well, it's just, I'm trying to migrate to Medina. That would spoil the entire plan. And so no one was supposed to say anything. No one was supposed to share any detail. You're literally supposed to up and leave in a second and drop everything, in a drop of a finger, and not look back, basically. And so they have homes, they have livestock, they have land, they have real estate, they have possessions, and they can't have any of that with them. Many of those companions actually left all of their clothes in their own houses. They left food that was supposed to be cooked in the evening, right? Everything was left, and they basically got on the way once the command came, and they got on the way to the city of Medina, which is about a 3-day walk. And so there is a lot of loss of wealth that's going to happen. And the Muslims need to be spiritually prepared for that reality. But in addition to that, there was going to be also a lot of loss of life. It's not just the wealth. I mean, you're going to be crossing this treacherous desert, by yourself. The Meccans were likely going to send like pursuit parties and in order to go after those Muslims and so on and so forth. It is also real that the desert is fraught with dangers and wild animals and bandits and scary stuff. Okay? So whether or not people are actually going to make it, that was a different question altogether, right? The Muslims were also about to become fugitives. I mean, you have these people that were established. They were well established in their own community. They had wealth, they had families, they had, respect, nobility, things like that. And now, they're going to leave all this behind and become fugitives. And so, wait, I was here, and then when I accepted Islam, I went all the way down there. I used to be king in my own people, but then when I accepted Islam, now I'm being pursued across the deserts like a fugitive. There's no fun in that. And so, psychologically speaking, a lot of Muslims felt, in a way, I mean, the faith is still strong. These are terrible trials of life. But they felt that I was in great advantage at some point, and Islam did not necessarily increase that advantage. In fact, in many ways, Islam put me at a disadvantage. And so in order to take someone who went through this roller coaster of life and to tell them, it's okay, you just have to put up with what's going to happen in the next phase, the next few years are going to be tough, but trust me, it's going to pick up again. Right? It never stays the same. Yes, you were here, and now you're hitting rock bottom. You're, fleeing across the desert, and you're a fugitive. Sure, we understand. You're going to go to a completely new city, new community. You don't know anyone. You have to start from scratch. Really, really tough. But then you also need to know that it's going to pick itself up, right? And so helping the believers understand that even when you feel that you're nearly dead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still capable of injecting life into something that, feels like that it died already. Okay? This community that had a lot of promise, after 13 years, less than 100 people had accepted Islam. It doesn't look like, a very successful undertaking. It doesn't look like a very successful enterprise. It looks like, a cult at this point. And these people used to follow the faith of their forefathers and so forth, and they were doing okay. But now that they've accepted Islam, they almost feel like, they're dead. And we need to convince them that even things that are dead, it is up to the Creator to inject life back into those things. So how do we renew that hope? How do we renew that hope? This surah is going to address that as well. Also Quraysh, the tribe that was persecuting the Muslims, and other tyrants in general, right? They insist on resisting change. They want to keep the status quo, right? They want to keep the social order, the economic order. They are not interested. I mean, think about it. Right here in America, I mean, how many hundreds of years did it take the majority in order to start allowing minorities to share in the cake, basically? Okay? And even when that happened, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, even after the Civil Rights Movement and so forth, minorities in this country, they still have to fight for the crumbs, right? Because people who are established in power and wealth, it's very difficult for them, to let go and relinquish that power. Why is it difficult for them? Because they think that this world is the end of all things. Because if I have it, then I have it, and if I lose it, I will never get it again. I will never have it again. The notion of the hereafter, the notion of God's justice, the notion of heaven and hell, the notion of accountability, that doesn't exist, right? It's all material, secular. And Quraysh believed in that wholeheartedly, right? And, to this day, people are having a hard time letting go of the affairs of this dunya, the affairs and the material affairs of the life of this world, because they think that this dunya is the end of all things. There's nothing that resides, after death. And so there is the Muslims also need to grapple with these realities where Quraysh and other tyrants, they don't have any concept of the afterlife. And because they don't have any concept of the afterlife, it's very, very difficult for them to let go. There's also the other concept that life is very short anyway. And if you think that every injustice is going to be mitigated and everything that is broken is going to be fixed and that every tyrant is going to be held to account, you're wrong, and you're going to live a life of suffering and pain. All right? Because so more often than not, the treachery of the serpent will overcome the tenderness and the kindness of the dove, right? The reason people are always very unhappy is because they expect that the life of the world, or grant them something that the life of the world is simply incapable of granting, okay? And faith is so necessary because what it teaches us is do what you can in this dunya, but if the plains are not leveled, and if you still have rights that are still owed, it's okay. I will leave it in the hands of God, and I will claim my rights in the afterlife. You know, I will try to get it here, but if I didn't get it here, maybe it's because God wants to multiply it and give it back to me, you know, tenfold or multifold. I'm okay with that. I will trust the wisdom and the judgment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that, you know, grants you, you know, this sort of like peace of mind. You know, a lot of people are tripping out, you know, the fear of missing out. Like, what's the acronym? FOMO. The American people, like, we come up with the weirdest acronyms ever. Like, you know, we're so good at this stuff. Like, fear of missing out. Why do people have any fear of missing out? Because, again, it's the assumption that it's just this world. It's just this dunya. If I missed out here, I will never have it. Well, I mean, a true believer is not supposed to have FOMO, because if I missed out on it in this life, inshallah, Allah will grant it to me in the afterlife. That's fine. In fact, getting it in the afterlife is probably a lot better anyway. You know, this is going to be like the premium package. Whatever you're getting right here in this dunya is just a, you know, is an approximation of what that, you know, gift is. But the real gift actually comes, you know, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, as we prepare the believers and trying to help them, hey, it's okay to hit rock bottom and to feel like you're almost dead, life will be injected back in you. But hey, not every injustice is going to be mitigated. Not every fear is going to be allayed, right? Not every bad thing is going to get fixed. It's fine to accept the world for what it is. And this is a place of pain, a place of struggling, a place of suffering. And all we can do really is to try to make it slightly better, because it is a jungle anyway. And the believer's role in this world is to try to tame the beast as much as possible. I mean, you cannot really extinguish the beast. You will never slay the dragon completely. It'll always exist. But all you can do is just, you know, keep tightening those ropes and those chains so that the beast does not ruin completely the experience of life. Number 6. Again, I'm going through the circumstances, the psychological, the philosophical, the social circumstances that the believers are going through right now, and how our surah tonight will help them, you know, inshallah, overcome that. To believe that only the faculties of sense perception are the means towards the acquisition of every type of knowledge is a huge fault. Again, let me repeat that. People who believe that any knowledge in the world can only be acquired through the sense perception, anything that cannot be acquired through sense perception doesn't exist, okay? Which is the view of materialists, the view of atheists, and, you know, people who exist. And there's a massive amount of omission in this, because there is so much that is yet to be discovered. There are things that simply cannot be proven by sense perception. You know, reason, for example. Okay, how do we prove reason through sense perception? Reason is a prerequisite of sense perception. Reason is a prerequisite of mathematical equations. It's a prerequisite of lab experiments. It's a prerequisite of science. Okay, like scientists never have to go through the effort of proving the existence of reason so that they can rely on it in order to prove the existence of reason. Like, you know, reason seems to be the one thing that precedes anything and everything, and we seem to accept reason on faith. We just accept that it's there. We just accept that when I apply reason, that somehow the results will be universally applicable and acceptable. Can we prove the existence of reason through sense perception? We know it's there, but we don't know how. We don't know what it is, right? Causal inferences about the world around us. We see patterns, and our minds are able to process those patterns, okay? The squirrel or the dog or the gorilla or other higher primates will see the seed and will see the tree. But they will never make the connection that when you take the seed and put it in the soil, that the seed will blossom into a tree. Right? And so cause and effect do exist in nature, like as patterns in the natural world. But it takes the human mind to look at that phenomenon and observe it and then analyze it and come up with an abstract concept about it. Okay? Only human beings can do that, and we can do that not because we are so good in the faculties of sense perception. We do this because we have that one thing that precedes knowledge, which is reason. Okay? And reason just exists. We have no idea how it exists. Certainly doesn't belong to the universe. Certainly cannot be proven, empirically, which tells me that at least, people who have, some sense of humility, and this is also one other thing that the surah addresses, by the way. The rejection of knowledge beyond human perception is an act of arrogance. Okay? The acceptance of unseen possibilities is an act of humility. What is yet to be discovered, what is yet to be known. Okay? Without that, we stagnate as a human community. Without that, we're complacent. Discovery is only made when we aspire for what resides beyond our perception. All right? And so the surah addresses the idea of accepting ilmul ghaib, accepting the knowledge of the unseen, the knowledge beyond, perception. This is not, believing in fairy tales. This is just a simple, humble approach towards reality, right? And so the surah does address that as well. And this is one of the reasons why Quraysh and others, the materialists of the time, the materialists of ancient times, the materialists of our time today, the people that believe everything is made of stardust, right? There's nothing, there's no soul, there's no spirit, nothing except what is material. This surah needs to debunk that as well. Because there is so much more in the world than just that. In one of my other classes, we talk about geometry, for example. And while the human mind can perceive a perfect circle, does a perfect circle exist in the natural world? It does not. Does a perfect straight line exist in the natural world? It's actually impossible to exist. It's mathematically impossible to exist, right? Because, if you try to draw, a perfect line that is perpendicular to another line, right? There's an infinite number of ways by which this line is going to deviate either to the right or to the left. And there's an infinite number of ways by which you can keep dividing the angles. And so there's no way that it's going to be 100% 90 degrees. But we can conceptualize that in our minds. This is what math is about. Math is an abstract concept. Math has nothing to do with the empirical world either. That's another category, by the way, that exists in the mind. And we have no idea how it came to us. And we use math as a concept in order to try to understand some of the phenomena in the natural world, right? And so the faculties of sense perception, while useful, they're certainly not enough in order to, and I can name a multitude of other examples, human consciousness, us being conscious of who we are, that cannot be proven through, empirical evidence either. And so being open to what lies beyond our perception is a sign of humility, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals so much to people with that type of humility. That's when the hearts are open, to the light of the Creator. 7, Quraysh may gloat that the Muslims are about to leave Mecca, that they defeated them, right? But it is also true that there have been nations in the past that rejected their prophets, and those nations met their demise. There have been nations that thought they would be, immortal. There have been civilizations that thought they would exist forever. I keep thinking, and the surah will address all of that, by the way. I'm of Egyptian descent myself, and I keep thinking of, my so-called ancestors. who lived maybe, whatever, 6,000 years ago. The science, the knowledge, the technology of ancient Egyptians, the temples, the pyramids, the stuff that science to this day is trying to understand. Like, nobody really has the most legitimate, universally accepted theory to this day about how the pyramids were actually built, right? We still don't know for sure. We have all kinds of perspectives, but we don't know how do these guys do it, right? Massive power, massive armies, right? They have the Nile, they had everything. They thought they were going to last forever. In fact, they lasted for a few thousand years, right? And so if your civilization started at, whatever it is, 7,000 BC, and went all the way to like 2000 BC, I mean, at some point or the other, many of them thought that they were going to last forever. But they were completely wiped out. The Egyptian religion, the Egyptian language, the Egyptian culture, everything about them is gone. The only reason we know that they even existed is because they left some inscriptions on the temples and the statues. That's it. Obliterated from history. Just a memory. Tourists go to Egypt today and take pictures with the temples and Sphinx and stuff like that. That's really it. It was reduced to a tourist attraction. Nothing is left. The Greeks, the same thing. I mean, you would think that, ancient Greeks with the invention of philosophy and abstract thought and all the incredible, that they would have saved them, right? Still did not. Completely obliterated. Romans, completely obliterated. I mean, and these are the ones that we know. Imagine the ones that we don't know. They thought they were going to live forever. Immortality, right? But that did not happen, subhanAllah. And so our surah will talk to Quraysh and also talk to us. Guys, don't worry. Quraysh thinks that they're going to last forever. I mean, there have been nations before them that were much more powerful, and they too were obliterated. So there has to be some mention of previous nations. You see how the surah needs to tackle all these social, emotional, psychological, philosophical, existential issues that the migrants are probably going through in their minds right now. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals this incredible surah at a critical time, just a few months, 6 or 7 months before the migration, right? And this surah is supposed to address all the aforementioned concerns, the concerns of injustice, right? The concerns of death, the concerns of, sustaining hope, the concerns of, rebuilding the prospect of the afterlife, the concerns of, the fact that justice will not always be delivered in the life of this world, the concerns of accepting the knowledge of the unseen, and understanding what happened to previous nations. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals, this surah, Surah Al-Haqqah, that basically addresses all of these concerns. Al-Haqqah. And this, for those of you who would like to open their Qur'ans, this is surah number 69. Surah number 69, Surah Al-Haqqah. A surah that is intended for the believers so that they keep in mind that they're about to become a witness to great social upheavals. Sometimes I wonder, the steadiness of life comes with a tremendous toll on the mind. People who, I think let's take Afghanistan for example, as an example. You may think that this is a poor country, that is struggling with lawlessness and lack of security, and stuff like that. But they don't have the type of mental health issues that we have here. They don't have the types of anxiety and depression. Because they can't afford to have anxiety and depression. They're angry for good reasons, but they can't afford to have mental health issues because there's a battle raging every single day for survival. I actually envy the Afghani people sometimes. Those who still live there, not those who fled the scene, okay? Those who fled the scene, God bless them. I don't want to get into anyone's intentions, right? There are immigrants that have been here for 30 years. Again, everyone, has the right to immigrate. And then there are those who just came on a U.S. military plane a couple of months ago, right? Because they just flashed some fake papers or whatever. But then there are those who still live there, the tens of millions of people that have to grapple with the realities of that country every single day. There you have a beautiful country, beautiful people, proud people with great, incredible history that have been impregnable for centuries, that were not breached. All these great civilizations that tried to take Afghanistan, they all failed. The only thing that managed to get into Afghanistan somehow was Islam, right? Islam managed to seep into the country and it captivated people's hearts over there. But you know what? I envy the Afghanis sometimes because they witnessed, in one generation, they witnessed tremendous changes that happen in the world, in their own country. They witnessed great upheavals. The types of stories that grandfathers will be able to tell their kids. I mean, what is life anyway? Is that you have a fancy house on top of the hill and you have 2 cars and everything is steady? Like every day looks like the other day? It's all copies of each other? I mean, I'm not trying to advocate turmoil or lawlessness here. And I'm not saying, war is the way to go either. But I'm just saying there's got to be, some spice to life. There's got to be a little bit of spice. And if you don't have spice, if your ultimate aim is to maintain the peace in your life as much as possible, you are on the wrong trajectory. You will get the peace, but after that, it's going to start messing with your head. Peace is not always the answer. There's got to be some effort, some pain, some struggle in life so that you're able to appreciate the meaning of existence, right? And so the Muslims in Mecca, they witnessed, like in one generation, they witnessed tremendous upheavals. I mean, from being a Bedouin, right, flocking the goats and herding the sheep, 30 years later to becoming the governor of Persia. In one generation. How awesome is that? In one generation. And you're still young, you're still healthy, you're still in your 60s, and you've seen with your own eyes in the course of 3 decades the absolute, utter changes that happened in your world and everyone else's. That makes you feel like, man, I wish I lived in those times. Subhanallah. It's incredible. And so, the people of Afghanistan today, as just a little example, they may not have all their money, they may not have all their wealth, they may not have, all the resources and all the oil refineries and all the water plants and all the infrastructures and the airports and the roads and the highways and the bridges and the Western luxuries. They may not have any of that, but you know what? They have their voice. At least today, they made their own choices. And that is my belief, by the way. They made their own choices. They're not under occupation like the rest of the world. They're not being occupied, not by the mind and not militarily. They are free to decide for themselves, at least. Tremendous pressure trying to squeeze them, but at this point, they can make their own choices. And whatever choices they make, I respect those choices. And so back to Surah Al-Haqqah. Surah Al-Haqqah, the word Al-Haqqah comes from the word Haqq in the Quran, and Haqq means truth. Okay? But there's 3 manifestations to that because Al-Haqqah means multiple things and they all are related to the word truth. So Al-Haqqah could mean a certain end. Truth as in the certain end. Like this world is gonna, transform, into something else. The Christians call it the rapture, the apocalypse. But the Quran doesn't characterize the day of judgment as one of destruction and obliteration. The Quran characterizes it as a moment of transformation. There's no point, for God to create this absolutely monumental universe, and then the human beings occupy a tiny little speck in that universe, and then He just crushes it, obliterates it into smithereens, and then in order to send human beings back to heaven and hell, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَوْمَ تُبَدَّلُ الْأَرْضُ غَيْرَ الْأَرْضِ وَالسَّمَاوَاتِ. On that day, The heavens and earth will be transformed. Now, transformed to do what? We don't know. We don't need to know, right? Transform to perhaps get ready for the next civilization that will come after us? Maybe. I don't know. All exciting possibilities. But it doesn't matter. What we know for sure is that transformation is going to happen. Al-Haqqah. It's like haqq. It's 100% certainty that this will happen. But also, if we understand the word haqq as truth, then Al-Haqqah could also mean the day on which the truth will be laid bare. It's the day on which the truth will be made apparent. All truths, the truth of God, the truth of the afterlife, the truth of knowledge beyond human perception, the truth of angels, the truth of ilmul ghaib, right? The truth of accountability, God's promise. Even our sins and trespasses will be laid bare. And I will show you, inshallah, in the course of the surah, how that is going to be the case as well, right? But there is a third meaning of haqq. Haqq also means right. This is my haqq, means this is my right. Okay? And so al-haqqah could also mean the day on which all rights will be fulfilled. If they were not fulfilled in this dunya, if the debts are not paid off in this dunya, then on the day of judgment they sure will be. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you guys look at the beginning of the surah, al-haqqah is mentioned 3 times, right, in the first 3 verses. Al-Haqqah, mal-Haqqah, wa ma adraka mal-Haqqah. God asks the question 3 times, and this is a rhetorical question because no one really has the answer. No one really understands the answer, right? So it's almost like God is trying to put the fear of God into people's hearts, right? When you keep asking questions about this massive day, this day of transformation, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intended to grab your attention and to put some fear in you, some awe in you, so that you're able to think differently about things. And the surah cuts through the chase really, really quickly here. All right? In order to start addressing the questions that we've raised earlier. All right? So ayah number 4 jumps into the previous nations right away. كَذَّبَتْ ثَمُودُ وَعَادٌ بِالْقَارِعَةِ. Both Thamud, the people of Thamud, and the people of Ad, they gave the lie to the prospect of that sudden calamity. Here al-qari'ah is another word for the day of judgment. So al-haqqah is a word for the day of judgment, right? And I gave you 3 meanings of that. And then there is the word al-qari'ah. It's a calamity. It's a sudden calamity. And it's so sudden, that it feels like the ringing of a million bells in your ears, right? Qar'a. So what are the people of Thamud and what are the people of Ad? The people of Thamud are descendants of the people of Ad. And the people of Thamud basically lived in the northern parts of Arabia. In fact, the remnants of their civilization are still extant. If you go to Saudi Arabia today and you're traveling north going towards Tabuk in the northern parts of Saudi Arabia, close to the Jordanian border, there is the remnants of this old village that is still there, where there's houses that are carved out in the mountains, there's inscriptions in the rocks and stuff like that. And people in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of urban legends about that area, and people try to avoid it, and all the highways go around it and stuff like that. There's even no tourism. Like, you need to know someone local in Saudi Arabia that will take you there, because this is like an accursed place. Everyone's trying to avoid it. That is where the people of Thamud used to live, right? The only thing that remained of the people of Thamud, right? The Quran says, يَنْحِتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بُيُوتًا. They used to carve the rocks of the mountains out as homes. They had tremendous technology. I don't know how they did that. Chiseling out a little statue is one thing. But to build an entire house carved in a mountain like that, that is a feat of technology that maybe to this day would be super expensive to do, and it would require massive amounts of equipment and stuff like that, and laser, God knows what, right? But they did it, okay? Completely obliterated and disappeared, right? And so how were they destroyed? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah number 5, فَأَمَّا ثَمُودُ فَأُهْلِكُوا بِالطَّاغِيَةِ. The people of Thamud were destroyed by a violent upheaval. What is this violent upheaval? A lot of scholars say that it was an epidemic. It was a plague of some sort that basically killed most of them, and those who were not believers, and whatever that was left of them looked like these hollow branches, basically. So all the people died. Their plants survived, their livestock survived, but the people actually died. Ayah number 6, وَأَمَّا عَادٌ فَأُهْلِكُوا بِرِيحٍ صَرْصَرٍ عَاتِيَةٍ. As for the people of Ad, they were destroyed by a storm wind furiously raging. It's interesting here because Thamud came after Ad. So Thamud are descendants of Ad, actually. And the people of Ad, they used to live in what is present day the Sultanate of Oman. So it was a coastal civilization. They lived on the coast, most likely the Indian Ocean. And they were destroyed by, as ayah number 6 says, rih, this massive storm, likely a hurricane. And it actually says that the survivors had to travel inland all the way north in order to avoid living in a coastal area anymore. So the people of Ad lived in a coastal area. Their descendants that survived became the people of Thamud, and they lived in the area that I described earlier, inland. But there's something interesting about these people, the people of Ad. The people of Ad, anyone remembers the prophet that was sent to the people of Ad? Hud. Salih was sent to Thamud. Okay? But the people of Ad, they received their prophet Hud. The word Hud sounds like what? No. The word Hud sounds like what? It's okay. Use your imagination. Sounds like Yahud, right? It's okay. It sounds like Yahud. What is Yahud? Jews, right? In fact, the counterpart of Hud in the Bible is Iber. Prophet Iber, who is actually in the Old Testament of the Bible, is considered to be the father of the Hebrew people. And the Hebrews, in the Hebrew language, they have a little bit of a ayn, just like Arabic. So you know how they pronounce Iber? They pronounce it Iber. What does that mean? What is the word for Hebrew in Arabic? Ibri. Ibri. Ibrani. Right? So Hud alayhi salam and the people of Ad were actually the forefathers of all the Semitic people, both the Arabs and the Jews. Right? But why did they call them Iber or Iber? What does that sound like in Arabic? Ibr. Abara, Ya'bur, means to cross. So in both Hebrew and Arabic, the word means the same thing, to cross swaths of land, or to cross a long distance. Okay? So Ibr, or the Hud, right? Hud, Yahudi, Ibr, Ibri, it's the same thing, right? It means that these people crossed all of the desert of Arabia, and then into Thamud, and then into Mesopotamia, where they actually settled. And this, again, is in line with all the historical and anthropological, archaeological evidence that we know, about the Hebrews over the centuries, right? So it's a fascinating reality for us to know that Hud alayhi salam is the father of the Arabs. He's also the father of the Hebrews. That is the source of all the Semitic people, basically. Go into ayah number 9. Another example of previous nations that were destroyed because they failed to acknowledge the possibility of knowledge beyond perception. They clung to the world. They had a fear of missing out. They would not relinquish power and authority. They affirmed the status quo. They were not open-minded about other possibilities, right? And they persecuted the believers amongst them. I was talking in the khutbah today about China and what is happening over there. وَجَاءَ فِرْعَوْنُ وَمَنْ قَبْلَهُ وَالْمُؤْتَفِكَاتُ بِالْخَاطِئَةِ. And there was Pharaoh too, and many of those who lived before him, and the cities that were overthrown. What are the cities that were overthrown? Use your imagination from your knowledge of the Quran and the Bible. What are the cities that were overthrown? Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember the story? The people of Lut alayhi salam? Okay. So in one ayah, God covers the civilization of the pharaohs. He covers the civilization of Sodom and Gomorrah and the punishment that was exacted upon them. And ayah number 11, إِنَّا لَمَّا طَغَى الْمَاءُ حَمَلْنَاكُمْ فِي الْجَارِيَةِ. When the waters of the flood burst beyond all limits, it was us who caused you to board the ark safely. In reference to Nuh alayhi salam. Right? So again, Thamud, Ad, the Fir'aun, Lut, and Nuh. Five prophets and their people. Subhanallah. So the first objective was achieved. God reminded Quraysh and reminded the Muslims, guys, don't worry about it. You think that Quraysh is all that. Quraysh is super powerful. They control the world. They control your lives. They expelled you out of your hometown. It's okay. They're not going to be the first. They're certainly not the last. There were civilizations before them that did the same thing, and they were destroyed. It's just a matter of time. All right. And again, I have to brag a little bit because if you look at every language that exists in the world today, this language is a manifestation of other languages, other precursors. Like, how old is the English language? The language that I'm speaking right now. How old is it? 400 or 500 years? Something like that, right? How old is the French language? Like 25 years? Right? I dislike the French, so I always make bad jokes about them, right? How long is the German language? All these, European languages are fairly new, right? One language led to the other, one language led to the other. Modern day, Chinese has very little traces of the Chinese language from 700 years ago, okay? I can brag about this and say, Spanish, same exact thing, but I can brag about this and say that the Arabic language, since pretty much, a couple of thousand years before the Prophet Muhammad, until today, remains robust and remains sound, and its vocabulary, the vernacular, remains in use. A lot of people, say, well, the Arabs have their different dialects. The Moroccans speak like this, and the Algerians speak like that, and the Egyptians and the Syrians and the Saudis or whatever, right? It's like 23 Arab countries. But essentially, if you watch the news in any Arab TV, for example, they all speak which form of Arabic? Fusha, the Quranic standard Arabic. That is the one thing that all the Arabs understand. So they may have their own local dialects, right? But it's, for the Arabs, it's like, I don't know, like Seattle English type deal. Like this proper library type English that people in the state of Washington speak. Like if you go to West Virginia, you may not even understand what they're saying. Like it doesn't sound like English, right? If you go to Arkansas, like what are you saying? Like half of what they're saying will just go over your head. Okay, but if you put or people from Liverpool or Manchester or whatever, like the English of people from India, like their English is amazing too. So, but if you put all these people together and you speak one standard type of English, they'll all understand, right? Okay, so Arabic is kind of the same way. So Arabs may have their different dialects, local dialects, and by the way, dialects are born out of colonialism. They're born out of imperialism, Western influence and stuff like that. If you've been occupied by the darn French, for 150 years, generation after generation. I mean, God bless you that you know a little Arabic. And the French used to coerce their populations to not speak the local language. Unlike the British form of occupation, which was sort of hands-off. I'll just take your money, that's all I want. But you can do whatever you want afterwards. The French wanted your money and wanted your life, basically. The Spanish were even significantly worse, but don't get me started on that. There has been nothing in history that would rival what the Spanish did. and the carnage that they exacted on South America, right? SubhanAllah. Maybe one of those evenings I'll talk more about that. But the Arabic language, the vernacular that existed in pre-Islamic times is still valid today. I still read poetry from 400 or 500 years before the Prophet Muhammad. I find that to be absolutely incredible. That a language remained alive for at least, maybe prehistoric times, I don't know, but at least for 2,000 years. We know that for sure. Okay? So I think we have some bragging rights here to do when it comes to the incredible language of the Quran. And the reason Arabic still survives today is that it's not attached to one superpower or one civilization or one country. It's attached to this timeless document that we keep studying. So ebbs and flows of history, civilizations rise, civilizations fall, it's okay. You know, Muslims may be defeated militarily or economically or politically across the globe, but the spirit of Islam, the civilizational spirit of Islam is manifested in the Quran, and that will never go away. That will never be extinguished. You know, inshallah, with the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So right, it was necessary to note that. So 5 previous civilizations were highlighted here, and one at least of the points, you know, that this surah came to address were addressed, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, moves into the next point that needed to be addressed. You know, the idea that when I'm at my lowest and I've hit rock bottom, you know, how can I pick myself up again? When I feel like it's over for me and I've become a fugitive. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the idea of life after death to, again, establish the possibilities and the necessities and the contingencies that do exist, you know, after life and after the realm of human knowledge, but also to teach us that even in your lowest times, there's always a way to pick yourself up. There's always a way, okay? It doesn't matter how dark life is. It doesn't matter when all the doors are, you know, shut in your face. It doesn't matter you have mental health issues, you've had tremendous loss of life, tremendous loss of health, tremendous loss of wealth, you name it, that you're going through. You need to believe, and this is not superstitious, this is not metaphysical. You need to believe 100% that things can always get better. 100%. And they may not get better on every front, but they will get better on some fronts at least. That is one of the realities of life that we know for sure, as much as we believe that there is life after death. Okay? So ayah number 13, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts talking about the events that lead up to the day of judgment, right? فَإِذَا نُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ نَفْخَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. When the horn is blown once, this is how everything starts. Now this definitely is a metaphysical notion, okay? The nature of the horn and how it sounds and how we hear it and all this stuff, you know, we don't ask questions about these things because it would be futile. You know, we're not talking about anything that can be proven by sense perception. Okay, that's the realm of our empiricism. Anything beyond that, you know, we accept the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he says here that the events will start with the blowing of the horn. And then what happens after that? وَحُمِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالُ فَدُكَّتَا دَكَّةً وَاحِدًا. You know, all this stable earth that we take for granted, the predictability of the earth, right? It will be mangled up. It will change. It's not going to be the way we see it today. A transformation is going to take place to that earth. Ayah number 15, it is right then and there, فَيَوْمَئِذٍ وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ. A fourth, right? This is the 4th word used so far for the day of judgment, al-waqi'ah. Al-waqi'ah, the event that will certainly come to pass. Ya Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prepare us for that day. You know, we may not live long enough, hopefully we will not live long enough to witness the events of, you know, of the apocalypse, right? We wouldn't want to be there when the Antichrist is, you know, raging through the earth and confusing the heck out of people. We don't want to be there. We'd rather, you know, leave the world, you know, earlier. But the thing is, you may be able to dodge the big Yawm al-Qiyamah, but you're not going to dodge your Yawm al-Qiyamah, right? Our Yawm al-Qiyamah will start when? Exactly. Exactly. I may dodge Gog and Magog and the Antichrist. Maybe I don't have to deal with those guys. But you can't dodge your own judgment, which will start the minute you die. That you cannot ignore and you cannot neglect and you certainly cannot avoid. All right? 16. وَانشَقَّتِ السَّمَاءُ فَهِيَ يَوْمَئِذٍ وَاهِيَةٌ. And the sky will be rent asunder, for frail will it have become on that day. There's a tremendous metaphor here. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not saying that the sky will actually be cleaved asunder. He's saying that physical laws are not going to be as predictable as they are today. The very laws of the universe will change, or maybe they'll be suspended. They're not going to work anymore. Transformations that happen, the laws of gravity, the small g and the capital G, and the constants of gravity, and pi and e, and all these things, they will not operate the way they operate today. And actually, that is what scientists do say. In fact, these same values, these same physical constants, right, that we experience as we study physics, the physics of our world, right, they don't apply to anything that is beyond our universe. They don't apply to dark matter, right? They don't apply in black holes. Even within the universe, there are areas where those physical laws simply do not apply. So on the Day of Judgment, when the Day of Judgment starts, the nature of those physical laws will basically be suspended. Ayah number 17, وَالْمَلَكُ عَلَىٰ أَرْجَائِهَا وَيَحْمِلُ عَرْشَ رَبِّكَ فَوْقَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ ثَمَانِيَةٌ. This is an event that will be witnessed by God directly and the angels. Now, God does not occupy the space-time continuum, does He? Actually, I received a funny question a couple of days ago. Well, I shouldn't say that. No question is funny. It just made me laugh, nonetheless. But it's not supposed to be funny. So the sister is asking, is God in us or is He not in us? And if He is in us, does that mean all of us are part divine? And if He is not in us, then in which capacity does He permeate our world? Is He around us? Right? And of course, this is something that philosophers have grappled with over centuries, theologians, right? And so you have, the extreme of, people like Al-Hallaj, for example, all the pantheists, right? Spinoza, the great Jewish philosopher of the 16th century. Even some modern day, philosophers would say that God exists in anything and everything, and there is divinity. In fact, some Muslims, perennialists and other groups, they argue the ayat from the Quran about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala breathed His spirit into Adam, وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. And if God breathed part of His essence into Adam, then there is a divine essence of God in every single one of us. Okay, that is pantheism. Al-Hallaj used to sit on his, Hallaj, I don't know if you even want to know about him. He's just kind of a really interesting figure. But one of those scholars of tasawwuf that really took things to the absolute extreme, to put it mildly. So he would be sitting, on a chair, and he'd say, the manner by which I sit on the chair is the manner by which God sits on His throne, right? And by the way, he would not mean any shirk by that either. Like, it sounds like shirk, but in his mind, he truly believes that God is inside of him. Therefore, when he sits on the throne, it's as if God sat on. When he sits on the chair, as if God sat on the throne. It's entertaining. If you want to read some of this stuff, it's really entertaining, but definitely unorthodox. Very, very unorthodox. This is not the conventional understanding of Islamic scholarship over the centuries. Versus the other notion that basically says that God is completely removed from human existence. There's no trace of God around us. Okay? And the evidence from the ahadith suggests otherwise. Sometimes the hadith would say, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَتَنَزَّلُ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala descends into the human realm in the middle of the night and asks anyone wants to seek forgiveness, I will forgive. Anyone wants to pray, I will answer their prayer. So there seems to be some presence of God, but it doesn't go all the way to the extreme of God, having a little peace inside every human being. And physics seems to have resolved that question for us in the last 100 years. And so when you read, for example, about how the great scholars, the Ash'aris, Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari or Imam Juwayni, and these great scholars of Aqidah that really did a tremendous amount of intellectual work, right? And they would say, since space is a creation of God, and since time is a creation of God, the Ash'aris 1200 years ago used to say that time is a creation of God. 1200 years ago. Which is a fact of science that was only discovered, about 50, 60 years ago when we learned about the Big Bang, that both time and space, were born at that event. Okay, the Ash'aris used to say that 1200 years ago. So they would say, since time is a creation of God and space is a creation of God, there is no way that the creation will contain the Creator. So they would reject the idea that God exists in the space-time continuum. Okay, through philosophy. Now today science proved the same exact thing. Fascinating. 1,000 years later. 1,000 years later, more. Right? And so how is it that God is present in the world of man then? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is present in our world through His qualities, through His attributes, through His graceful presence subhanahu wa ta'ala, but certainly not contained in the space and the time that we occupy. It's really important to understand that this is a matter of aqidah, but also a matter of logic and science. And so when ayah number 17 says that the transformation of the universe is witnessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the angels, then the ayah suggests that Allah is inside the universe or outside the universe. Has to be outside, right? You cannot be inside the turmoil as it's happening. This suggests very clearly that God exists outside the limitations of time and space, the space-time continuum. Again, that's a little tidbit that is not entirely necessary, but I figured, let's talk about it since, it came across. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is enthroned. He sits on His throne, surrounded by the angels. The throne is carried by 8, some scholars say 8 ranks, 8 groups. But it could also be 8 angels that are carrying the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ayah number 18, it is on that day when all these transformations are happening, God reveals to you why those transformations are happening. He needs to bring people to account. He needs to administer justice. God needs to be God. He knows everything. He understands everything. He has foreknowledge of everything. But there's got to be the convening of the divine court, and people need to be brought to account because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be the utmost just. He cannot just say, I decided. No. You will stand before God and be asked questions about everything that you've done. And it's a process. Okay? God's knowledge is not going to impede with the administering of His justice subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَوْمَئِذٍ تُعْرَضُونَ in ayah number 18, لا تخفى منكم خافية. On that day you shall be brought to judgment, and not even the most hidden of your deeds will remain hidden. This is a very difficult thing to grapple with, because we're not used to that. We're not used to the idea of all of our secrets being made apparent like that. We're not used to that. There isn't a single human being that you are entirely naked in front of. Not a single person. We always hide something, even just a little bit, right? You will hide, you will act a certain way in front of strangers, and you will hide some of your own qualities that you only reveal to your close friends. But then you will interact with close friends, but you still keep some of your qualities that you only reveal to your family members. And you interact with all of your your parents and your spouse and your kids and your brothers and your sisters in a way, but there's still a couple of qualities that you only keep to yourself that only your spouse will see. And then there is some qualities that only your CPA will see, right? and some qualities that only your attorney or maybe your doctor, that even your spouse doesn't know. Every single one of us, we have layers and layers of secrets and private areas in our existence. In fact, I dare to say that there is a part of us, like dark corners of our minds, that we try to hide from ourselves, that we try to forget of who we actually are and what we actually are. And we try to, those sins and those trespasses and those tendencies and those desires, God knows what we keep hiding, right? From everyone's eyes. And so the notion that somehow all of it, 100%, will be revealed publicly before God is a very unsettling thing. It's a very frightening thing. Like, heaven and hell notwithstanding, all this stuff, just the notion of all my secrets being laid bare before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very unsettling. But subhanAllah, when else will that ever happen except the day of Al-Haqqah? It's the day on which everything will be laid bare anyway. That is how God characterizes the day. And it's one thing, by the way, to be disgraced before God, even though you keep saying to yourself, He already knows, He already knows, He already knows, He already knows. But just because it's being said and God is looking at you right like this, oh, Monday the 25th at 2:35 p.m., you thought this and you said this word and you watched that video and you talked to that person and you went to that place and you did this thing. That's very, very frightening. Okay? Now, this is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I can imagine at that moment when the disgrace is also made public. When your parents are standing over there in the corner and they hear the entire conversation. And then your mom is like, oh my God, my daughter, she used to pretend to be like this, and she used to say these things, and she's hiding all this darkness. She's done all these things. The disgrace of that moment is going to be astounding. Right? Let's just put it this way. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that everything that you are, يَوْمَئِذٍ تُعْرَضُونَ, you will be fully exposed. لَا تَخْفَى مِنْكُمْ خَافِيَةٌ. Not the slightest thing will be hidden. Okay? It comforts the hearts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make an exception to that rule with the believers, with the righteous. Okay? In the hadith of Imam Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will actually bring the believer a little bit closer and will say to the believer in a voice that is not heard by others, سَتَرْتُهَا عَلَيْكَ فِي الدُّنْيا, I have covered you up for what you've done, and I did not let anyone know what you've done in the life of the world. وَهَا أَنَا ذَا أَسْتُرُهَا عَلَيْكَ الْيَوْمِ. And today, I will continue to cover you up, because I'm not going to disgrace you. I chose not to disgrace you in dunya, and I'm not going to disgrace you in akhirah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause these veils to surround this person, so you have your own private chamber and you're going to get judged that way. I ask Allah to make it so for us. Allahumma ameen. Right? Really important for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, deal the punishment, but then give you a little relief afterwards. That has always been the Quranic way. All right, so we're on 19. So the outcome of judgment has to be one of two things. Some people are going to go to heaven, some people are going to go to hell, right? There's no third path. So the next two sections of the surah basically describe what happens to each group and how each group is identified. And that is really, really interesting. And so this is a message again to the Muslims of Quraysh. Hey, the Muslims of Mecca, you've been a victim of a tremendous amount of injustice. It's okay. If you don't get what is rightly yours in this dunya, you will get what is rightly yours in the akhirah as well. So one after the other, the 7 or 8 points are being addressed by the surah. What is the sign that someone is going to be saved? That person receives the book with the right hand, right? So imagine you standing right there. Imagine the intensity of that moment, and the book of your deeds is being given to you. See the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He wants you to read it. Here's the documents. Here's the evidence against you. And He says, go ahead, read it. You be the judge of yourself. Go ahead and read it yourself. So I want you to imagine you're standing there and the book is right in front of you and you're pushing yourself to use your right hand in order to pick it up and you can't. And then gradually, against your will, it is your right arm that is moving. Ya Allah. We seek Allah's protection from this. Allahumma ameen. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us our books with the right hands. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. So you're among the lucky ones and you receive the book with your right hand. فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ Ayah number 19. فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ فَيَقُولُ هَا قُرَأُوا كِتَابِيَ. He's so proud that we'll tell everyone, guys, come read my book. Getting very excited. I don't mind. Please, huddle up. If you want to read my book, see like page 16 has a lot of charity that I've given. Page 27, all the nice things that I said to my mom. Again, it's okay to be proud on that day because you're saved. Okay? If you've been humble your entire existence, that's the day, to be happy before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَيَقُولُ هَا اقْرَأُوا كِتَابِيَ. Come all read my book with me. And the first thing that he says, in order to tell everyone why he's standing where he's standing today, ayah number 20, إِنِّي ظَنَنْتُ أَنِّي مُلَاقٍ حِسَابِيَ. I used to think with near certainty in my life that one day I will be brought to account. I took responsibility for my actions. I did not pin my deeds on somebody else. I did not live in accordance with the FOMO paradigm. I always knew that what goes around comes around. Isn't that like the most metaphysical thing? Even atheists believe that what goes around comes around. On what basis, really? You don't even believe in God. Why are you assuming that the universe somehow has a redemptive quality to it? That the universe somehow will come back and, stick you where it hurts because of something bad that you've done. Like, that's the most metaphysical thing that seems like everyone really believes, and people are always trying to be careful. If I do good, if I help the poor, then, I will receive help as well. Even non-believers would say things like that. And if I take something that is not mine, if I hurt somebody, well, karma, right? Karma will happen. What is karma? Like, you're an atheist, dude. Why do you believe in karma, right? But again, the human mind is not made of stardust. We're not just material. There's so much. And even unconsciously, we realize that and we discover that, as we tread the journey of life. And so, إِنِّي ظَنَنْتُ أَنِّي مُلَاقٍ حِسَابِي. I knew that what goes around comes around. And I knew that I was going to be judged. And I knew that one day I was going to stand before God. And here I am, standing before God today. I think I did what I could to prepare for this day. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into some descriptions of Jannah here that I'll skip over in order to jump into ayah number 25, which describes what happens in the opposite process. Okay? وَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِشِمَالِهِ. The signal for doom is to receive the book with the left hand. Now this person is in complete denial. This is different from the other one. Denial is a convenient thing. This person says, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I didn't receive my book. I wish, I didn't do what I did. I wish that my death was the final event. I wish there was no resurrection, right? Keeps going through, I wish, right? Well, it's too late, okay? I wish I did not know my account. I wish that my death was the end of me, was the final event. I wish. That's what that person, keeps saying. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into, again, some descriptions of the types of punishment that person will receive. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His grace and mercy and compassion upon each and every one of us. Allahumma ameen. Okay? Now that the surah talked about the previous nations, talked about the day of judgment, talked about the punishment of this group and the reward of this group and the punishment of that group, now we've established all kinds of things. That it is humble to believe in knowledge that exists beyond human perception. It is humble to believe in the transformation of the universe. It is humble to believe that not every injustice is going to be mitigated in this world, and sometimes I have to wait until the day of judgment in order to get what is rightly mine. It's not just Quraysh, previous nations also rose and fell, and they thought that they were going to be eternal and immortal, but they were not. Okay? And now we are getting into the end of the surah, and the surah is being concluded. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath. And He does that in a very poignant way in the Quran. Right? So look at ayah number 38. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَا تُبْصِرُونَ. If I were to swear upon something, if I were to take an oath upon something, I would take an oath upon the things that you see, تُبْصِرُونَ. And then ayah number 39, وَمَا لَا تُبْصِرُونَ. And I would take an oath upon things that you cannot see. In the surah, Surat Al-Haqqah, that basically talks about the existence of knowledge beyond the faculties of human perception, God takes an oath upon both. I take an oath upon the things that you see and experience and taste and smell, all of your sense perception every single day, because these are blessings too. It's a reminder. These are such wonderful things. The apple that you ate today, the meat that you consumed today, the vehicle that took you to work, the house in which you live, the inventions of science and technology that you enjoy, right? The beautiful landscape, the flowing rivers, the waterfalls, the oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen in your atmosphere, all the blessings that can be proven through sense perception. I would take an oath on those blessings because they're all great. In human spoken language, when I want to take an oath upon something, then I'm trying to do what? If I say, I love this pen, that's one statement. Or I swear by Allah, I love this pen. Why do I have to say I swear by God? To make you believe. Because I'm thinking that maybe you're not going to believe me if I said, and if I said the object of my oath needs to be lesser or greater than me. It has to be. So if I say to you, I swear by my cat, I really love this pen. Am I really emphasizing that I love the pen? Right? You might think that, oh, he's not really serious because, I swear on my burrito. So I cannot take an oath upon any object. There has to be a really great object, right? And so, some people will say, I swear on my kid's life. When they're not Muslim, as Muslims, we're not supposed to take any oath except in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And if you can avoid that, it's actually better. I always tell my kids, you don't need to take an oath. Your word means something in of itself. You don't need to say wallahi. Don't say wallahi, right? I'm not assuming you're lying. Always say the truth and I'll take your word for it. But if you have to take an oath, you always take an oath upon God's name. We're not supposed to take oaths upon, objects or people. But some people who are not Muslim will say, I swear on my mom's head. Because, again, they're assuming that you believe they revere their mom or they love their kids so much that is an object that is important to them. The ultimate of all objects is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now, when God takes an oath, what does it mean? The scholars said that when God takes an oath upon an object, number one, that object has to be lesser than God because He is God. So God cannot take an oath upon something that is greater than Him because there's nothing that is greater than Him. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath upon an object, the scholars said that it's because He wants to lend importance to that object. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I swear by the stars, He wants to show you that the stars are so important, so magnanimous, and so incredible that they were worth God taking an oath upon them. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَا تُبْصِرُونَ, I swear by all the things that you enjoy through your sense perception, and all the things that you don't know, that are still beyond your sense perception, what is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying? That there is blessings that you know, and there's blessings that you do not know. There's blessings that you experience every day, and there are blessings that are yet to be discovered and experienced. He's kind of hitting the two birds with the same stone. I affirm your attachment to the material world, because the material world has a lot of good and exciting things, but I also want you to know there is just as much excitement in the things that you have not witnessed and you have not seen and they have not been discovered because they reside beyond sense perception. And what is the answer to this oath? Because every time I say, Wallahi, you expect me to say something. I cannot say this, I swear to God. And then just stay silent afterwards. Like you'll swear to God what? What? Right? This is called Jawabul Qasam in Arabic grammar, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the oath in ayah number 40. إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ. Indeed, this Quran is the speech of a noble messenger. This is a speech of a noble messenger. And it's interesting here because this is the first time the Quran is being mentioned in the surah. Right? You know, God is talking about all kinds of other things, but now He's talking about the Quran. Why? It'll be revealed later, right? إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ. The beautiful, incredible words of the Quran, these are words of the noble apostle. These are the words of the noble messenger, right? They're not poetry. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ. Okay? There is a limit to the power of eloquence. Okay? You know, remember I was talking earlier about how within 30 years, you know, that entire generation witnessed tremendous changes in the world, right? The governors of you know, previously Roman cities, previously Persian cities, right? Previously Yemeni cities, Egyptian cities, right? You know, previously European cities in Spain. You know, Muslims were all the way from Spain to China. In the khutbah today, I was talking about how Uthman used to send envoys to the emperor of China. This is like literally 20 years after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. One generation. And all these tremendous things happened. You know, Muslim merchants were almost where Indonesia is. Muslim merchants reached the equator. All of that within like 25, 30 years. Right? And so there is a limit to the power of poetry. I mean, name one poet in history that used, you know, really fancy lyrics in order to mobilize millions of people. What? When? How? You know, you may still remember the songs of Frank Sinatra or something, or the Arabs remember the songs of Kulthum, or what is the other, you know, Indian lady that just died recently, you know, that sang in almost every movie. Yes. Right. People may remember the lyrics of some of those great singers, right? But what is really the power of those lyrics? I mean, can you mobilize the masses and lead revolutions and change the entire world with a song? I mean, it touches the heart. You know, art has a way with the human heart, for sure. It inspires people, right? You can have a really great wedding. You know, when you play you can have a really romantic movie or whatever. But you're not gonna turn a man who used to herd a goat into the governor of Syria within 25 years because of poetry, right? Logically speaking, that's impossible. There's got to be something more that is involved in the words of Muhammad beyond their eloquence, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ, 41. And 42, وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ. Okay, so if he's not a poet, some people would say like An-Nadr ibn al-Harith, Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, these two leaders of Quraysh, one of them used to say, well, Muhammad's words are just poetry. And the other one said, well, no, they're not poetry. It's just soothsaying. He's a magician. He's a sorcerer. And he has this influence on people's hearts. Right? Okay, well, I mean, that's one thing. Bring your own sorcerers. Bring your own magic as well, right? There can't be just one sorcerer in the world. There's got to be, if there's one sorcerer, there's got to be more, right? So let's hire the best. Isn't that what Pharaoh tried to do, kind of, right? Hire the best and go against them. If the problem is soothsaying and sorcery, then you know you'll be able to find someone that could fight Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam. But he is neither. That's the point. The power of the words of the Quran is tantamount to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 43, تَنْزِيلٌ مِّن رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. It came from God. That's why, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you in the end why He makes mention of the Quran. And I will end with this. it was wild, trying to finish Surah Al-Haqqah in one session, but I think we nearly managed to do that, alhamdulillah. Towards the end of the surah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes, He tells you why He makes mention of the Quran. Because He says, in the midst of confusion, in the midst of the darkness, the mixed ideas, the mixed ideologies, the restlessness of the mind, the restlessness of the heart, not knowing where to go, the mental health issues, the atheism, the LGBTQ, all the confusion that happens in the world, there's got to be an anchor. There's got to be something reliable, something that stands the test of time, something that is philosophically sound. I hear this time and time again, by the way, from Western philosophers. They would say, if I were to follow any of the major religions, I would definitely follow Islam. Because Islam, the Quran, is the most philosophically robust document amongst all the other scriptures. I don't want to, spend any time bashing Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism. That's not the point. But the point is, if you go through the Bible, in fact, if you ask Christians themselves, about the Bible, they will tell you, well, I know that it has a lot of mix-ups and a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of things that are contradictory, and a lot of things that, it looks like it was written by man. You have the apocryphal gospels that were somehow removed from the Bible. The Catholics, they accept certain, gospels. The Protestants, the King James Bible, they, accept certain types of gospels. The Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, the Egyptian Orthodox, the Mormons, they added a few books as well. But with everything that happened to the Quran and to the Muslims, across the centuries, with all the upheavals and all the divisions and all the not so good things that happened, there's always been one Quran. And there's never been a disagreement on that. We disagree about everything else as Muslims, but there has never been a disagreement about that. You go to Tehran in Iran, the heart of the Shia world. You go to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, the heart of the Sunni world, and it's the same exact copy. In fact, it's probably the copy that was made in Saudi Arabia anyway, that everyone has been using, right, all over the world, because they printed hundreds of millions of those everywhere. It's the same copy. But has the Quran been preserved in a book? How was the Quran preserved? That's it. It's preserved right here. It was preserved by people that memorized it. It was preserved through the uninterrupted chains. It was preserved through the ijazas, where all the haffaz of the Quran, all the people, the memorizers of the Quran, they will tell you, here's my certificate. And the certificate has the name of his teacher and every preceding teacher all the way to the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, I saw an ijazah, recently, and by the way, I don't have an ijazah personally. I should have done it, but I never took it seriously. I needed to go sit with the sheikh and, maybe over a month or so, keep reciting until the sheikh gives me the approval. I never did that. I was young and lazy. And so I should have done it. But when you look at the ijazah, one of the sisters, sent me her ijazah. Her husband sent me her ijazah on WhatsApp. And basically, the document basically says, I recited the Quran to Shaykha so-and-so, and then the date and the year. And then who recited the Quran to her Shaykh so-and-so, and then the date. Who recited the Quran to his Shaykh so-and-so, and then the date. And you keep seeing the dates, from 2000 something into 1990 something, into 1925, into 1750. You keep seeing the dates, receding backwards, and then it goes all the way from this, recited from this, from that, all the way, and then it goes to Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, right? Because he's the one that collected the Quran. All the way, from Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, an Rasulillah, an Jibreel, an Rabbil Izzah. The chain goes all the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every hafiz that has an ijazah, that has a certificate today, has that, somewhere at their homes. Somewhere. This is how the Quran was preserved. Some of these huffaz, one of my Quran teachers, he was a dermatologist. His name was Tariq Mahmoud. he died in Sisi's prisons in Egypt because he was in the opposition, lived an honorable man and died as a shaheed. نحسبه كذلك عند الله عز وجل. He used to tell us that he did not touch the Quran for 15 years because he didn't have to. Everywhere he needed to recite, just recites from memory. We would be sitting in a group and all of us are reciting the Quran and holding, even the Huffaz, it's not always fresh in your mind, right? So it's easier to just use the Mus'haf. And then when it's his turn, he goes at it, without a single ounce of hesitation. Like we'd make mistakes and we're reading from the book, and he doesn't make mistakes and he's reading from memory. This is how powerful the hifz, the preservation of some of these people were. Just absolutely astounding. This is how the Quran was preserved. That cannot be said about any other document on this earth. There's no other document that stood the test of time, that is filled with moral common sense, that is philosophically robust and philosophically sound, that is historically accurate, that did not get itself entangled in political matters or scientific claims that were later disproven. Nothing like that, that the Quran got involved with. And so in the midst of the darkness of confusion, you can always go back to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and find your answers. That's what it says. So the Quran is given 3 qualities as we conclude. Okay? Number 48. وَإِنَّهُ لَتَذْكِرَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. For those who have good hearts already, the Quran is a good reminder for them. It gives them that extra push. Right? وَإِنَّهُ لَتَذْكِرَةٌ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It's a reminder to the God conscious. Okay? 50. وَإِنَّهُ لَحَسْرَةٌ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. And one day it will become a grave source of bitterness and a grave source of regret for those who reject the truth. Subhanallah. Okay, so for the believers and for those who reject the truth, 51. وَإِنَّهُ لَحَقُّ الْيَقِينَ. There is no absolute truth in this universe except the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the only absolute truth. Why is it absolute truth? Everything else is relative truth. But why is this absolute truth? Because these are the words of God. These are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I imagine sometimes God, who created the universe, who has infinite knowledge, He's trying to communicate with humanity and give you a summary of that knowledge. Imagine God is trying to reduce the infinite into the finite. He's trying to put infinite divine knowledge into one finite book and hand it over to humanity, right? This is the golden goose that you have with you that people often ignore and neglect. And they don't want to memorize, they don't want to read, they don't want to understand, they don't want to study, which is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Quran. And with a celebratory tone, God finishes the surah, فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. Now, extol the limitless glory of your Lord. Show thanks. Say Alhamdulillah. Mention God's name for the gifts that He has given you in the midst of confusion. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who will always live in the shade of the Quran. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fill our hearts with the teachings of the Quran, to increase us with humility because of the Quran. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the guidance of the Quran, to enable us to live within the boundaries of the Quran, to follow the letter of the Quran. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the Quran the force that propels us forward into the right direction. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the Quran the barrier and the veil that will protect us from hellfire. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us use the Quran to inspire and bring happiness and bring meaning and purpose to the lives of others, and not use the Quran to hurt and judge and put people down. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the Quran the one thing that always brings us together with excitement and celebration as Muslims. Allahumma ameen. And as we lived in the shade of the Quran in this dunya, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us His shade and to admit us to Jannah on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen. Jazakumullah khair. I can take some questions if you guys have any. Otherwise, we need to pray Maghrib, inshallah. Yes.
Emphasizing on your statement about preserving the Quran and the Arabic language, I read some of the history after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. some Christian priests and religious people, they say we are not Arabs. We have the dialect in Lebanon. That's how we write it. The way we speak, we write it. And they had, and there was a big movement at the time.
In Lebanon, you said?
Lebanon, well, Lebanon and Syria.
Okay.
Used to be.
It's the French, I'm telling you.
The French, and of course it was the French. And then they had lots of meetings. And one time they were sitting, those priests, talking on how to do this and how to make the language written and how they
Like their old language, like the Assyrian language, maybe?
When the priest,
Uh-huh.
and of course all of them, they are very well educated, they know what they are doing. When the priest, he was sitting just nothing, and they turned to him, they told him, come, tell us feedback. What do you, and he opened his briefcase, and he said, how about this? What are you going to do? He has the Quran in his briefcase. He said, what are you going to do with this? And of course shut them off.
Subhanallah. Thank you for sharing this. Jazakallah khair. Yes.
The day of judgment, you said, I mean, in the Quran it mentions that we're going to see all of our, the good, the bad, and the ugly deeds, right? If someone repents, is that person still going to see the bad deeds that he did?
Great question. So the brother is asking, if we're going to be seeing everything, all of it is going to be made apparent and laid bare on the Day of Judgment, is there a possibility that we've repented from certain sins and God forgave us for those sins, so they're not going to be brought forth? And the answer is yes. There is, when the government releases classified documents, when some of those documents become declassified, you still see certain lines that are redacted with ink. And so maghfirah, which is one form of forgiveness, is when the record stays, the sin stays in your record, but God forgave you for it, you're not going to be held accountable. So it's like, committing theft with the suspension of penalty. Like the court will say, there is a record, but you're not going to go to jail type thing. But then, the afu of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His afu, which is, I don't know if we can translate this word in English. It's a different form of sin, where the scholars say it's a different form of forgiveness of sin, where the scholars say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you for it. He will remove the record completely. So even your arrest record, your conviction record, everything is removed, right? Redacted. And the most beautiful part is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause you to forget about it either. So you won't have to remember it, because it will generate feelings of regret. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, it's as if it never happened. Yes. So there are sins, if they are forgiven by God, they never show up in the record. He's not going to talk to you about it. It's not in the book, nothing. Thank God. Yes.
You mentioned we all hiding something from friends, from family. So those black ideas say, or some things we are hiding from ourselves. So we try to avoid thinking about that.
Right.
Is that healthy or not?
I mean, the brother is asking, those dark ideas or tendencies that we have, is it healthy to keep pretending that they're not there, or keep hiding them? I would say, if it's something that you're doing and it's wrong, you cannot ignore it. You have to address it and find a way to fix it. But sometimes we have tendencies, and those tendencies are hiding somewhere in the deepest corners of our existence. We don't act upon those tendencies. It doesn't affect our behavior, and it's just there, lurking in the darkness, okay? I say focus on it only if you find help. If you talk to a therapist, if you talk to the imam or whatever. But if it's not affecting your behavior and it's not changing your life and it's under control, I'd say keep the beast in the cage. keep the beast in the cage. You don't want to know about it, we don't want to know about it. Yes.
Just a quick question about the people of Orange and New. Is there like strong evidence in Islamic tradition that not all the people, because that's what I got from when you were talking about Orange and New, that not all the people were destroyed completely. Some people did manage to escape, and ultimately they were the ancestors of Hebrews. So that would mean that the birth of all the Abrahamic, the three of the Abrahamic religion, like Christians, Muslims, and Hebrews are basically, they're basically the
Right.
Christians.
Right.
And so it happened in the coastal belt of Yemen and Oman, because we talk about, when we talk about the human civilization, we read like two of the biggest civilizations, Indus Valley civilization and the Nile Valley civilization. So there's a very little, I think, at least I don't know of any references that suggest that there was like a civilization on the coast of Oman and Yemen, and they are the ancestors of Arabic people and people and the Sudan. So is that like a strong tradition?
Yes.
in Islam?
Yes, 100%. And not only in Islamic tradition, but this is the anthropological history of the Hebrew people as well. Like they will tell you that they also originated from the southern parts of Arabia. So the Jews are Yemenis, basically. I think that's what we're saying here. Yeah, all the Semitic people, from pre-Abrahamic times, all the Semitic people are basically descendants of the tribe of Ad, according to the Bible, according to the Quran, but also according to anthropological research. So you can definitely look this up on your own.
العرب العاربة والعرب المستعربة.
Correct.
عاربة is the عاد ثمود, المستعربة is from
They're Arabized, so they acquired the Arabic language and the Arabic culture. Like Ismail alayhi salam is Arabized. His mom is Egyptian, his father is Iraqi, right? But it's interesting because when you think about it, even Ibrahim alayhi salam, his ancestral roots are still Semitic because his ancestors come from Yemen. And so, Ismail alayhi salam coming into Mecca was sort of still a homecoming for him, which is interesting. But from his mother's side, she definitely was Egyptian, and neither of his parents spoke Arabic, so he had to learn the Arabic language at a young age. So he became from al-Arab al-Musta'riba, the Arabized Arabs, basically. Any other questions? Yes. Good question. So sister is asking, she's asking us to emphasize a little bit on what tendencies is. Are we talking about tamed desires that have never materialized into action or words? Or are we talking about memories of past sinful behavior, things I've done in the past? And I think that what we are primarily concerned with here is things that you've done, sins that you've committed that you managed to hide from other people. Okay? Now, I'm just going to use this example because it's a stark example. It's crude, but it's a stark example that will make the point clear. Let's say that someone has a tendency to be a child molester, like someone deep inside, like a man who deep inside prefers little kids. Like that, this would be a monstrous thing. Like today, we consider this to be like some crazy cancer of the mind, right? Like this is a terrible tendency to have. Now, if that person never ever committed the sin of acting upon that desire, then inshallah ta'ala that person is saved before God. Because, as in the hadith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not hold the ummah accountable for the thoughts that they have unless those thoughts are followed by words or actions. إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَضَعَ عَنْ أُمَّتِي مَا حَدَّثَتْ بِهِ نَفْسَهَا مَا لَمْ تَقُلْ أَوْ تَعْمَلْ, in the hadith, right? And so we're safe there. But if at some point or the other you've committed that sin and you acted upon the dark desire and you did not repent and you somehow managed to keep it from the eyes of other people, it will be revealed before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it will be a cause for your destruction. And so we definitely make a distinction there because we cannot control, the trials that God has imposed upon us. I use this same argument, by the way, when I talk to young Muslims who ask me questions about homosexuality, right? I use that same argument. It is one thing to possess a desire, an illicit desire, to do something that God prohibited, and it's a completely different story to act upon that desire. Those are two different things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable for one, and He will not hold you accountable for the other. But the point is, if I keep dwelling on the desire, and I keep thinking about it, and I keep entertaining it, and fantasizing over it, sooner or later, you might actually act upon it. So there is still danger there. Yes?
So thinking about the surah and I guess how it's kind of progressed, can you elaborate on the psychological changes or the heart changes that the Sahaba went through when they heard about all the stories of Adam, Thamud, and Pharaoh, but then how it transitioned into speaking about the day of the certainty of the day of judgment, in which like the sky that they rely upon for direction or for time, as well as mountains that they rely upon for landmarks, and all of that is being taken away, and there's no certainty in what they rely upon on a daily basis. Can you speak about how that could have potentially changed them because they became the best of us? So how can we extract more from?
Great question. So, let's put ourselves in their shoes for a second. Like I said earlier, those Sahaba, many of them used to be men, respected men in their own community. Hamza was a well-known hunter, and he was wealthy, and he was so respected and loved by everyone. But when he became Muslim, his status was basically reduced to a fugitive. Now he has to run in the darkness of the night. He feels wronged. He feels a tremendous amount of injustice was inflicted upon him because of the free choice that he made. And he looks at Quraysh and thinks of Quraysh as a formidable power that oppressed him, in such a way. He's a fugitive. He's going to be running across the desert. And it's turmoil. Because on the one hand, I believe in the veracity of the message that I decided to follow, but on the other hand, I'm not sure if I'm able to cope with the toll that this now had on me. In fact, many of those companions, their spouses would refuse to follow them, or their kids would refuse to follow them. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, two of his sons were still in Mecca when he accepted Islam and they did not. Okay? And so all these families torn apart, it's got to have to take a toll on the heart. But all you're trying to do throughout this process is trying to find some type of a material mitigation, trying to find some justice in the world, trying to await the news of Quraysh being destroyed, trying to wait for your sons joining you or your wealth coming back to you, right? Because that's what the mind does, is that, okay, I am really trying to make sense of all of this, so I have to look for signs in the world where I feel that things are being fixed. Okay? What the surah, I think, taught them, and this is the impact of that psychology, what the surah taught them is that, number one, even though Quraysh is going to be destroyed, but it's not going to be destroyed in the manner that you thought. Okay? Most of them actually accepted Islam later, right? Many of them died in the subsequent battles, but most of them accept. So while the idea of Quraysh was destroyed, the people of Quraysh were not destroyed. No one thought of that. That is the one thing that they did not consider, right? So sometimes relief comes in a completely different form. Sometimes relief doesn't come in the life of this world. And it comes in the afterlife. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to cause the Muslims to entirely rely and depend on Him and Him alone, He makes references to how this reliable physical world would be obliterated. Like you said earlier, the stars and the mountains and the landmarks and the things that they've used to find their ways. Well, what if none of that is there? What then? And so you gradually start thinking to yourself, well, maybe this is not about me finding justice and me finding direction and me finding, some type of retribution in the life of this world. Maybe this is about me surrendering myself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and just enjoying the journey and letting God make the decisions in my life and not sweat the small things. Maybe by letting it go that I will have all of it. Isn't that ultimately sometimes what the true lesson is? Let go of this dunya and it'll come running after you. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, said, whoever keeps running after this dunya will keep running away from them. And whoever turns away from this dunya will start running, after them. And so maybe the whole lesson here is that you just have to let go and trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fix it. If not in this life, then in the afterlife, I win either way. Okay? And I feel like maybe I need to think about your question. I think your question is really profound. And maybe I need to think about it a little bit more. But right off the bat, I'm thinking that this is the psychology that is supposed to be engendered here, in this conversation. Yes?
This question I heard on the Judgment Day, everybody, somebody appeared in sweat and appeared. Is that because of the wrongdo of us, or because of the shame of us, or because of the heat of the sun?
Well, it's all of the above. I don't know about the sun because, the Day of Judgment doesn't happen in this universe. The Day of Judgment happens away from the physical world. But, I think in a metaphorical way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, uses things and objects that we're familiar with and uses psychological states that we're familiar with. And so when He says that you're going to be nearly drowning in your sweat, the mind is supposed to draw a picture, to paint a picture. When do I feel drowning and drenched in my sweat, right? When it's super humid. Okay, well, maybe that doesn't apply to the Day of Judgment. When it's extremely hot, when it's extremely crowded, when I feel ashamed, right? When I'm very stressed out, when I'm tense. And so, it paints a picture of what the Day of Judgment is going to feel like. It's not, I don't think this is meant to be taken literally. Will our bodies have sweat glands like we do today? I don't think so. But will we feel pain? Yes, we will. And so, it's interesting when you look at these things and you try to ascertain what is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to keep as a metaphor and what is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes as an actual physical truth. So I'm inclined to feel like this is about creating a perception in the heart as opposed to actually being, drowning in sweat physically. Yes?
It's a question, but it's not related to the surah.
Mm-hmm. Please.
Alright, so every time I read Surat Al-Baqarah, in ayah 6 it says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ أَأَنذَرْتَهُمْ أَمْ لَمْ تُنذِرْهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And then it says, ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. And then in Surah Al-Kahf it says, فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. So from Surah Al-Baqarah, this ayah gives me the idea that maybe the individual doesn't have the choice to believe. So either you warn them or not, they're still going to stay as disbelievers. But then in Surah Al-Kahf it says they have the choice. So which one is it?
Probably we need to have a longer conversation in order to give your question justice. But the simplest way to respond to this is that choice ultimately belongs to us, right? And God will never hold you accountable without that choice. That is a must. Now, when you think of the Creator of heavens and earth, on the other hand, it would not make any sense for you to assume that anything happens in the universe without God's will. That doesn't make any sense. It wouldn't make Him God. And so, are human actions also created by God? Or are human actions created by human beings? So again, on the one hand, if you say it's all my actions, I create my own actions, then you're basically saying there is something that exists in the universe that God has nothing to do with. But if you say God is the one that creates all actions, then you're saying there's no human choice, in which case, how can we be held accountable? The Ash'aris actually responded to that, with their concept of acquisition, al-kasb. And the concept of acquisition basically says that God creates all actions, and the human being will choose out of those actions which one, it's like a flow chart, and you would choose this, and this will lead to 5 other actions that God created, and you're going to choose one of them, which will lead to 5 other actions, and you choose one of them. The Ash'aris brilliantly addressed this, brilliantly. To this day, no one managed to do it with the same efficiency, by the way. And so, God creates the actions, but you choose from the list. So it says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَوَاءٌ عَلَيْهِمْ. They've already committed kufr, they've already decided. They have made up their minds. Whether you try to convince them or not, they're still rejecting you. And as a result of their stubbornness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will seal so that they can't hear anything any longer. All of that is a consequence of an initial choice that they have already made. This is not God preventing them from believing or causing them to commit kufr. This is Him responding to their hubris and their arrogance.
Because Allah knows everything, right? So even if Allah gives them the chance, they would still not do it.
They would still not take it.
Yes.
That's a fair point. Yep. Any other questions, you guys? Yes, sister.
Thank you, Imam, for explaining about the Al-Haqqah. So my understanding from the interpretation that you gave to us, that I don't know if I'm wrong or not. So Al-Haqqah means that, what is it called, that the truth, right? Tawakkul means also to find the happiness and the truth from Allah. So if we submit ourselves to Allah, we will gain peace in our heart, even though the calamity will come over us or test us during our lifetime. So basically what I'm trying to ask, that is that okay for someone, as you said that before, that okay, we should not swear or make an oath when we say something to people, but what's happened is that particular person keep lying. Are you going to believe in that person? See, that's what sometimes that people using the fake or the Quran saying things to other people in order for that other people to believe them.
Right.
But at the same time, they have the tendency to have the hypocrite, statement saying that I'm doing this, doing that. The next day, saying different things. So it's just like a mix.
Right.
Sometimes people have a misunderstanding about the content of the Quran also, and then the message from Allah to us as human beings. And so that's why I always said it to myself. I'm teaching myself that practice what I preach.
I appreciate that, sister. And obviously what you're describing would be absolutely deplorable behavior. And we do experience people like that, every single day. And these are the people that give a bad name to every faith, basically. And I always say, if you are not able to say the truth on your own, why should we believe you when you take an oath, right? Maybe you'll still take the Lord's name in vain, and you'll still lie, even when you say wallahi. And so, I definitely agree with the spirit of what you're saying. Thank you.
And then another thing that I just want, I don't know if I'm wrong or not, but the interpretation of what you just mentioned about the Al-Haqqah, that means when we as humans have a lot of tests from Allah, right? And then with them, sometimes that we distrust or maybe we doubt about what we do. Why do I need to pray if I still have an issue? Why do I need to believe in Allah, while we still need, we still have issues. But the hidden message for us as human, I think that Allah always tests us if we become closer to Him. And I do believe that. The more closer we are to God, the more closer we are to Allah, the more trial that He's trying to do to us, because He wants us to rise. And then what's happened with the tall tree? Shaking, right? A lot of wind, a lot of problems.
And the closer you are to God, the strongest you are. The strongest you are, the more likely you will withstand those tests. I do agree with that. Jazakallah khair. Thank you, sister. Yes.
You had mentioned in the move from Mecca to Medina and the loss of many things, and a lot of the focus was on the materials and as far as what we're hearing tonight. But then you had also mentioned, I believe, like the loss of family and friends as well. And for someone like myself, it's hopefully coming into Islam and has a mother that I love so much, and she's been so special to me. But I don't think she's going to come this way. What's the best way to deal with that in particular?
Yeah, I understand how that could be very tough. And I think that the easiest way to respond to this would be to believe in your heart of hearts that God that helped you see the path and exposed you to the teachings of Islam and prodded you and put the right people in your life, is capable of doing the same thing with your mother. And the factors that brought you here may still bring her to the faith as well. I don't know if you guys watched, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's dialogue with Jordan Peterson, that was released last week. This is a must-watch. You have to watch that video. It's an hour that is worth your time. And Sheikh Hamza in the video he talks about how he came to Islam, in his late 20s, and he comes from a family of scholars and philosophers in the liberal arts tradition and stuff like that. So, his dad and his mom both came to Islam like whatever it is, 30 years later or something like that. And so, the hearts are always in the hands of God. And all we can do is, just do our best, treat our parents with kindness and love, and pray, for them every single day that they will be guided, and then they'll see the path. If your mom is, as you described, I don't see any reason why she won't be curious enough about this path of ours to eventually take it. We're gonna pray for your mom, brother, inshallah. Yes.
Brother here, so I heard in hadith, that certain righteous people, I guess, could act as intercessors for people. So would that be like sufficient motivation for us to like work super hard so we can be an intercessor for our own parents, I guess, inshallah, even though they're not Muslim, or does that like count them out the equation?
No, absolutely. We can and we should and we must. Imam Ghazali, and to a lesser degree Ibn Taymiyyah, they actually talk about the different categories of people when it comes to faith. And so there is obviously, a very exclusivist streak in mainstream Islam and most major Abrahamic faiths, that you have to believe in the doctrine in full in order to be saved, and if you don't, you're going to hell. But Imam Ghazali actually layered this, in a very profound way, and he said that there are people with no exposure to Islam, and there are people with little exposure, but it's not enough for them to know about it, and then there are people with bad exposure. And he specifically talked about the Turks, because at his time the Turkic people were not Muslim yet. So he said, if a Turk grew up in a tribe, taught every single day that Muslims are bad and Muhammad is a bad person, how can we expect them to even consider, Islam? And so he basically says people who are not exposed, or who are lightly exposed, who are negatively exposed, they will be judged on the day of judgment based on whether or not they excelled in their own faith and in their own tradition before God. So Imam Ghazali was not saying that we're all going to sing Kumbaya and go to heaven together. He's saying that Muslims are going to heaven, but not every non-Muslim is going to be doomed either. That there are some who are not Muslim that will be saved. And this is very different from perennialism, where all of us are, if you follow any religion, it's going to be okay, this Unitarian sense. That's not what we're saying either, right? So I think that is a very useful perspective today, because at least it leaves the door open for some of our parents who are not Muslim, who have had a very negative exposure to Islam, who don't have the intellectual faculties to go and read and study and go into the hadith and the Quran. I mean, it's not easy, in the postmodern age for people to do that. Like, that is a huge hurdle, obstacle right there. So what am I saying? I am saying that it is still possible that some of our parents, because they've had very little to no exposure, or perhaps very negative exposure to Islam, or maybe they're old and they're not capable of studying the deen and taking it seriously in order to consider it and so forth, that they might still be saved. All of that is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All we can do is just pray. Pray for them, pray for ourselves, and let the Creator decide how to adjudicate these affairs. Yes?
I just want to add one more thing for you guys. This idea is not like Imam Ghazali or some other Imam came up with it. It's actually deep rooted in the Quran. In one of the surahs it says Allah is not going to punish a group of people until He sends a messenger to them.
Right.
So that idea is in the Quran. So
Right.
it's not alien to the Quran.
Right, absolutely. Guys, I'm going to have to conclude here because we need to pray Maghrib. I'm starting to freak out. So, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much. May Allah reward you. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asri insana fi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihat. Tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.